Welcome back to the Shir in Lakutei Stiches. We are about to conclude volume 17, and we will learn today the first sticha for Parshas Behar. It is the Rashi sticha. So I'll spend a few minutes giving the background, and then we'll learn the Rashi, and we'll see what the Rebbe says about the Rashi. The beginning of Parshas Behar concerns the mitzvah of Shemitah and then Yovel, the seventh year, rest for the land, and the Jubilee year, the 50th year, the year of freedom. The Torah introduces this section by saying, "Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Behar Sinai leimoir." Hashem spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and when they come into the land, they should count 6 years and then rest on the seventh." Now, this introduction, Behar Sinai, Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. So first of all, important to remember generally that the Torah gives us different times, different points in their journey of 40 years when the Bnei Yisrael received different mitzvahs from Hashem. Some of them are clearly related to their time, such as, for example, when they're about to enter the land of Israel, and questions come up about inheritance, about dividing the land, and Hashem gives mitzvahs related to those areas. It's clear that the mitzvahs are given then in relation to the situation that has come up then. Now, what about the mitzvahs which are not related to particular circumstances, which come up at different points in their journey? Where were they given? We know that there were mitzvahs given from Mount Sinai. Those are the 10 Commandments, and some others given at Sinai. The beginning of the book of Vayikra Hashem el Moshe, Hashem called to Moshe, Vayidaber Hashem elov, and Hashem spoke to him, Me'ohel moyed, from the meeting tent, from the Mishkan. As Rashi says in Parshas Kistiso, that once the Mishkan was erected, no longer did Hashem speak to Moshe from Mount Sinai. Instead, he spoke to him from Oyel Moyed, from the top of the Kapodes, the covering of the Or HaKodesh, as the Pasuk says in Parshas Truma, "V'nei adati lechoshom v'dibarti itcho me'al hakaporos mibein shnei akruvim." I will meet you there, Hashem says to Moshe, and I will speak to you from atop of the Or HaKodesh, between the two cherubim, the two cherubs. So here, the beginning of Parshas of the book of Vayikra says Hashem called to Moshe and spoke to him from Oyel Moyed, from the Mishkan. The end of Chumash Vayikra, the last pasuk, says these are the mitzvahs which Hashem commanded Bnei Yisrael at Har Sinai. The end of the book of Bamidbar, Numbers, is these are the mitzvahs which Hashem commanded Bnei Yisrael through Moshe on the plains of Moab next to the Jordan River. Jordan is right across the Jordan River from Eretz Yisrael. So before they crossed into Eretz Yisrael, they are in the land of Moab, which today is Jordan, and the plains of Moab is where they were camped before they entered the land. So the Apostle said, these are the mitzvahs which Hashem has commanded Bnei Israel through Moshe Rabbeinu in Arbois Moab, the plains of Moab. The beginning of Chumash Devarim is, the introduction is that just across the Yarden from Eretz Yisrael, Moshe Rab, in the land of Moab, just across the Jordan River from Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Moab, Moshe Rabbeinu began to explain, to repeat, and explicate those mitzvahs which had been given to him before. So how does all this work? What was given at Sinai? What is given from Oil Moed? What is given in the plains of Moab? So we find in the Gemara, in a couple of places, I'll name one, Chagiga, Davov, Omed Aleph, there's an argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel said that the mitzvahs were given in a general way, bechlolus, at Sinai, but the details were spelled out later in Oyel Moed from the Mishkan in the course of those 40 years. So as Rashi explains, for example, in Parshas Yisro, at the end of Parshas Yisro, which is just the aftermath of Matan Torah, Hashem said to Moshe, tell the people, they shall make for me an earthen altar, Mizbach Adomo, and they shall offer on it the oilos, the fully burnt offerings, and the shalomim, the peace offerings, which are divided between the altar and the koyanim and the owners. But it doesn't say what one does with an korban oilo. What is meant to be done with it? How is it offered differently from any other offering? It's not clear, because according to Rabbi Shmuel, it was not yet spelled out. They only knew that they are to erect an altar, to bring, for example, a korban oilo, and they were not yet told the specifications of the korban oilo. That in Parshas Yisro in Chumash Shmos, describing the story of Matan Torah right after the Aseres HaDibros were said. Further, in Chumash Vayikro, there we find plenty of detail about the korban oilo, how it must be flayed, how it must be cut up, how it must be offered on the altar. So those details were spelled out later, says Rabbi Shmuel. So in fact, there was a period of time where it wasn't clear exactly how they were supposed to do it, but it didn't matter, because at that time, they didn't have the specifications, so however they did it would have been okay. So that fits with what the Torah tells us in a general way about the aftermath of Matan Torah, and then the specifications in Chumash Vayikra, which was said in Oyel Moed. The difficulty, of course, is that you have a lot of mitzvahs which are sort of performed, but they're performed without their details until the details are given in Chumash Vayikra, and those are given from Oyel Moed. So in fact, Rabbi Akiva argued on Rabbi Shmuel, and he said no. the mitzvahs and all the specifications were given at Sinai. They were repeated at during the years, and they were repeated from Oyel Moyed during the years of wandering in the desert. They were yet repeated again a third time on the plains of Moab before the people entered the land. But it's not that details were added. They were simply told to us that they were given again and again at these different stages. But even at Sinai, they were given the mitzvahs with their details. So again, according to Rabbi Shmuel, they received the mitzvahs in a general way at Sinai. The details were spelled out later from Oyel Moyed. According to Rabbi Akiva, the mitzvahs with all the details came from Sinai. That's the background, and we will see how this ties in with the Rashi that we're going to learn. Now, there's something fascinating about this Sikha which we're going to learn, and that is the way the Rebbe understands the Rashi. Rashi asked a question which is asked in Torah's Koyanim, in the Medrash Halacha on Chumash Vayikra. He answers the answer which is given there in Torah's Koyanim. But the way the Rebbe learns that Rashi is not out to provide an answer to the question of the Torah's Koyanim. No, Rashi has a question based, according to Rashi's style, fitting in with Rashi's style, is based on Pshuto Shel Mikra, the simple meaning of the Pasuk, demands an answer. There's a difficulty here. But Rashi brings the Torah's Koyanim because based on what the Torah's Koyanim asks and answers, we will also have an answer for the question which is bothering Rashi, a question in Pshuto Shel Mikra. Where does the Rebbe see all that? Not in the words of Rashi, but in the citation, what Rashi brings from the Pasuk. Remember, the Rebbe has a general policy that Rashi is very, very specific in which words he brings from the Pasuk, and by bringing these words, he's telling us what he's out to address in the Pasuk. As we will see, the Torah's Koyanim is not really addressing the words which Rashi cites from the Pasuk. So he doesn't bring those words which Rashi doesn't bring those words which the Torah's Koyanim addresses. The words which Rashi does bring don't seem to be addressed by the Torah's Koyanim. So what's going on? That's why the Rebbe learned that really Rashi has a different question on the words which he does cite from the Pasuk. But he brings the Torah's Koyanim because by means of the Torah's Koyanim we will have an answer to the question that Rashi has on those words of the Pasuk which he cites in the beginning of his comment. So it comes out that the whole Torah's Koyanim discussion from the point of view of Rashi is kind of like a front. Rashi is using the Torah's Koyanim the way he understands it in order to satisfy the question that he has on the Pasuk, as we will see. So the Rebbe brings that at the beginning of the Parsha, which, as I said before, the Pasuk says, Hashem spoke to Moshe at the Mount of Sinai, saying, and then the Pasuk goes on in the next verse about the 6 years, and then the 7th year, that the land should rest, have a rest for the sake of Hashem, meaning not just as a farming technique, but as an acknowledgement of Hashem's mastery of the earth. In any case, so on the first pasuk, where it said Hashem spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai, Rashi brings two words, Behar Sinai, at Har Sinai. And he explains, what is the connection between Shemitah and Har Sinai? Surely all the mitzvahs were given at Sinai, and he answers, Elo, remember, these are the words of the Torah Kohanim, almost verbatim. Elo, rather, it means like this. What is the mention of Har Sinai doing here in connection with Shemitah? It's meant to tell us that just as Shemitah was said in all its details and all its fine points, not only as a general mitzvah, but with all its details, it was said at Sinai, so too all the mitzvahs were also said at Sinai in full with their details. That's part one of Rashi, and that's a quote from Torah's Kohanim. Then Rashi says, Kach shnuya b'Torah's Kohanim. This is the way it was taught in the Torah's Kohanim. It appears to me, says Rashi, that it means as follows. Since we don't find the mitzvah of giving the land a rest, we don't find it repeated among the mitzvahs which were stated in Arbois Moyov, in Chumash Devorim, where Moshe Rabbeinu gives over many of the mitzvahs, repeats many of the mitzvahs. This is not repeated at all. So from that we learn that all the details of the mitzvah of Shemitah had been said earlier. We have details here in our parsha, exactly what you do or what you don't do during the sabbatical year. They must have all been said at Sinai. So thereby we learn about all the mitzvahs, that the mitzvah as a whole and the details and its fine points all were given at Sinai, and they were repeated in Arbois Moav, in the plains of Moav. That's the end of the Rashi. Which means, seemingly, that Rashi comes to answer the question. We know that all the mitzvahs were given at Sinai, yes, but that's only the mitzvahs in a general way. But the fine points of the mitzvah, we need proof that they too were stated at Sinai. So what's the proof? So we derive it from Shemitah. So just as Shemitah was said with all its fine points at Sinai, so to all the others. But who says that Shemitah teaches us about all the other mitzvahs? After all, it's only concerning Shemitah that it says Behar Sinai, so maybe it means only Shemitah. Therefore, Rashi continues that since the mitzvah of Shemitah is not written again in Mishnah Torah and Chumash Devorim, so we would know even without this pasuk that the mitzvah of Shemitah with all its details was given at Sinai. So why does the pasuk need to say so? Because it's not teaching us about Shemitah itself. For that we wouldn't need the words Behar Sinai. We know they were given Behar Sinai because they're never repeated again in Arbois Moav and Chumash Devorim. So they're not there for the sake of the mitzvah of Shemitah. They're there to teach us about others. In other words, had we needed the word Behar Sinai to teach us that the mitzvah of Shemitah was given at Har Sinai with all its details, then I wouldn't know anything about other mitzvahs, because those words, Behar Sinai, are needed to teach us about Shemitah itself. But since we don't need those words to teach us about Shemitah, why not? Because Shemitah, we know, is given as Sinai because it was never repeated again. So surely Shemitah is definitely a Sinai. So why did the Torah say about Sinai? Not for Shemitah alone, but for Shemitah to be a model for other mitzvahs that they too were given at Sinai. So looking at the Rashi at face value, and in fact, that's the way most of the commentaries on Rashi explain it, what emerges is this. Rashi is asking the same question as the Torah's Koyanim. What's the connection between Shemitah and Har Sinai? So why need it be said about Shemitah that it was said at Har Sinai? Rashi's answer from the Torah's Koyanim is that the words Behar Sinai are not, in fact, about Shemitah. They're about all the mitzvahs that they were given with their details at Sinai. And by that, he means to exclude, to negate the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel that we talked about before. Rabbi Shmuel holds that only the mitzvah in its general form was given at Sinai. The details came later. So Rashi, based on Torah's Koyanim, is saying no. The mitzvah with all its details were given at Sinai. And we learned that from Shemitah. That's the way we would understand the Rashi, looking at it face value and looking at the Meforshim on Rashi. But says the Rabbi, that leaves us with a lot of problems. Since Rashi's question is why Behar Sinai is written in connection with Shemitah, so there's no problem with Behar Sinai in and of itself, according to the way we're learning now. The problem is, why is it singled out at Har Sinai about Shemitah? So how can Rashi quote, cite from the Pasuk only the two words Behar Sinai without even alluding to the further psukim which talk about Shemitah? At least Rashi should allude to them by saying Begoimer, etc. Nothing. He just quotes the two words and he goes on to explain them, but there's nothing wrong with these two words in and of themselves. There's no difficulty. The difficulty is why Shemitah is singled out with the mention of Har Sinai. Second of all, if Rashi is out to negate, and the Torah's Koyanim is out to negate the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, who says that the mitzvahs were given only in a general way at Mount Sinai, and then the details were given later. So why does Rashi bring up Arbois Moav? We don't find that Shemitah was repeated in the plains of Moav. We weren't talking about the plains of Moav. The question was only, was the mitzvah given with its details at Sinai, or was it given only in the general way, which is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, in a general way at Sinai, and the details were filled in later in Oil Moed? So why mention Arbois Moav? Further, we need to understand, according to the this interpretation, and why Rashi finishes off by saying all the mitzvahs were given with the details at Sinai. Rashi finishes off with the words, and they were repeated in Arba Ismoya. What's that got to do with anything? What he wants to say is that they were repeated at Oyel Moya. That's the opinion of Rebbe Akiva, which Rashi is supporting, based on the Torah's Koyanim. Fourthly, it's strange that Rashi quotes the Torah's Koyanim almost verbatim, and then he says, it appears to me that the meaning of the Torah's Koyanim is such and such. It's not generally Rashi's way. He's not out to explain, to be a commentary on Torah's Koyanim. So we must say, said the Rebbe, that there would be a possibility of learning the Torah's Koyanim differently. If we would learn the Torah's Koyanim differently, that other way of learning the Torah's Koyanim would not answer the question which Rashi is out to answer in Pshuta Shel Mikra. But because, says Rashi, it seems to me that this is the meaning of the Torah's Koyanim, now we have an answer to the question which Rashi has based on Pshuta Shel Mikra. So what is that other alternative way of learning the Torah's Koyanim, according to which we wouldn't have an answer on some unspecified question in Pshuta Shel Mikra? What is that all? Besides these general questions about the Rashi, there are also a couple of fine points which the Rebbe picks up on. Why does Rashi switch from the word Har Sinai to Sinai? Rashi begins by saying, what is the connection between Shemitah and Har Sinai? And then he continues, weren't all the mitzvahs given at Sinai? And from then on, he doesn't go back to Har Sinai, the Mount Sinai. He just says Sinai. Why the switch? And then the Rebbe asks on another point which we're not going to be able to address in this year, so we'll leave the question as well. The Rebbe begins his explanation by saying that in fact, Rashi is not out to answer the same question as Torah's Koyanim. No. What he's bothered by is the very word Behar Sinai. How does that fit? Since even before we know which mitzvah is going to be introduced with these words, Hashem spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai, before we know what he's going to say, we already have a problem. What's the problem? Ever since the Mishkan was erected, Hashem did not speak to Moshe from Har Sinai. He spoke to him from Oyel Moed, as the beginning of the Chumash Vayikra, which we talked about earlier, says. Hashem spoke to Moshe from Oyel Moed. Now you could, with a big stretch, say that in fact, this mitzvah of Shemitah is out of chronological order. So all the mitzvahs and the whole Chumash Vayikra was said from Oyel Moed after the Mishkan was erected. Then suddenly we come to the Parsha Shemitah, which is a throwback to an earlier time when Hashem was giving mitzvahs from Har Sinai. It's very difficult. It's very forced. Why say that way? The simple reading of the pasuk, the Pshuta Shel Mikra, would indicate that there is that sequentially. It's also difficult to say that Hashem gave the mitzvah earlier, but for some reason Moshe failed to give over the mitzvah to Bnei Yisrael until later, after the Mishkan was erected and after all the dinim and the mitzvahs which are recorded in Vayikra were already transmitted Now Moshe comes and says, oh, I have a mitzvah which Hashem actually gave me back at Har Sinai. Again, very difficult to say so, especially in light of the Rashi in Parshat B'Shalach, who said, where Rashi says that when it came to the mitzvah of Shabbos, the Shabbos was given to Bnei Yisrael even before Sinai, at Moro, which is several stops before Sinai. They ran out of food, and Hashem said, I'm going to give you food from heaven, which is the manna. Every day you'll get a portion per person per day, except on Friday morning, you'll get double because on Shabbos, it won't be available for collection. It won't land in the field. You won't be collecting it, so you'll collect a double portion on Friday. Now, the Torah tells us that on that first Friday, the elders of Israel came to Moshe to inquire, why is there a double portion of mon today? And Moshe said, oh, I didn't tell you. Hashem said that tomorrow is Shabbos. And Shabbos there will be no mon to be collected. And therefore he's giving you today a double portion. And he promises that it won't go off as the mon did if you left it overnight. On other days it went off and spoiled the next morning. It was inedible, but on Friday's double portion, it won't spoil. Oh, so Moshe said, there's a mitzvah which I didn't give over. And Rashi said that was wrong on Moshe's part. So why would we say, according to Rashi, that Moshe Rabbeinu failed to give over the mitzvah of Shemitah from Har Sinai until now, where they heard from him all the mitzvahs of Chumash Vayikra? Very difficult to say so. The Ramban says so, but according to Rashi, it's very hard to say. Okay, back to the question. So why does the pasuk say here, Behar Sinai? Surely the mitzvah is being said already from Oyel Moed, ever since the Mishkan was erected. Why is this mitzvah Behar Sinai? Therefore, Rashi learns that Parshas Behar, our Parsha, was in fact given to Moshe Rabbeinu by Hashem sequentially where it is in Chumash Vayikra. So why is it that over here it says Behar Sinai? Surely this is a later stage and the mitzvahs are being given from Oyel Moed. It's because the people were still encamped around Har Sinai. And the whole area is called Sinai because of the mountain. So when it said that Hashem spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, it means that the foot of Mount Sinai, Hashem was speaking to Moshe from the top of the Or HaKodesh, the Holy Ark, from the Mishkan. He wasn't speaking from atop Mount Sinai as he did when he gave over the Ten Commandments. But that's quite surprising that the Torah says Behar Sinai, and it actually means the area around Har Sinai. It means Oyel Moed, which is at the foot of Har Sinai. So because it's surprising, that's why Rashi brings it from Torah's Koyanim. And according to Rashi's understanding of the Torah's Koyanim, we must say that Behar Sinai here means Behar Sinai, as we will see. The Torah's Koyanim says that from the word Behar Sinai, which are said in connection with Shemitah, we derive with regard to all mitzvahs that they were said with their details at Sinai. Because since we would already know without the pasuk telling us, we would know that this parsha of Shemitah was said at Har Sinai since it wasn't repeated later. So why is it said? because Torah is teaching us about all the other mitzvahs that they too were said with all their details at Sinai. How do we know that Shemitah itself was given in full with all details at Sinai? That dependent on how we're going to learn the word Behar Sinai. If we learn that Behar Sinai means atop the mountain, Hashem spoke from on top of the mountain, then we need Behar Sinai for the mitzvah of Shemitah itself to tell us this Kiddush, this new idea that the mitzvah of Shemitah was given from the top of Mount Sinai, even though it's recorded here after all the other mitzvahs of Chumash Vayikra. Since the words Behar Sinai are needed to teach us about the Shemitah itself, we couldn't derive from those words a rule about all other mitzvahs that they too were given with all the details of Sinai. Therefore, we must say that according to the Torah's Koyanim, the word Behar Sinai means in the area of Har Sinai, at the foot of Mount Sinai. And the fact that the details of Shemitah were given there at the foot of Mount Sinai, we're not going into whether on the mountaintop or in Oil Moed. The fact that they were given in Sinai, I would know anyhow, since the Torah doesn't repeat it among the mitzvahs which were given in Arvos Moed. So therefore we must say that the words Behar Sinai come to teach us not about Shemitah itself, which we would know anyhow. They come to teach us about all the other mitzvahs. So now it works out that this is both according to Rabbi Akiva and according to Rabbi Shmuel. The argument of Rabbi Akiva versus Rabbi Shmuel is that Rabbi Shmuel said that they were said in a general way at Sinai, Mount Sinai, and they were spelled out in detail later from Oil Moed. Rabbi Akiva said that when they were given at Mount Sinai, they were already given with all their details. But that's just a question of whether they were said generally at Mount Sinai or not. Here we're not talking about that. Here we're talking about the fact that all the mitzvahs were given with all their details in Midbar Sinai, from Oil Moed. And that's not the subject of the argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. So Rashi's interpretation is not subject to the argument of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. It's not supporting the view of Rabbi Akiva against Rabbi Shmuel. It's not talking about the same thing at all. So what is Rashi out to negate? He's out to negate Arvos Moed. Since there are certain mitzvahs which were said in Arvos Moed and Chumash Devorim, so we might have thought that the details of those mitzvahs were in fact said only at the end of the 40 years when they were already at the plains of Moed. That's what we learn from the words Behar Sinai, that they were not taught only later, but all the mitzvahs with their details were already given earlier at Sinai, from the top of the mountain, like the Ten Commandments, or in the area around Sinai, they were given from Oil Moed. But not that they were only introduced at Arvos Moed. That's what Rashi wants to bring out. And that's why Rashi uses the words, V'nira li shekach pirusho. It seems to me that this is the meaning of the Torah's Kohanim. Before the Rebbe asked, is Rashi a commentary on Torah's Kohanim? The point is that Rashi wants to negate that the mitzvahs were not given in Arbois Moyo. And that's the way Rashi understands the Torah's Koyanim. And the Torah's Koyanim is telling us that we know that the mitzvah of Shemitah was given Behar Sinai since it wasn't repeated by Arbois Moyo. That's what the Torah's Koyanim is out to say. The Rebbe now comes back to explain the shift from the word Behar Sinai in the beginning of the Rashi versus Mistinai. The rest of the Rashi, now we understand. When the Rashi brings from the Posuk, it's Behar Sinai. But when Rashi is saying that all the mitzvahs were given at Sinai, he doesn't mean Mount Sinai from the top of Mount Sinai. They were given later. The Moed mostly. And therefore Rashi uses the word Sinai and not Har Sinai. Now, the Rebbe shifts to the Pnimius HaTorah, the inner meaning of this argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. The Rebbe says that, generally speaking, when Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva argue, the accepted view is that of Rabbi Akiva. Now, what's the difference between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva in their general approach? So the Rebbe has several sichas where he explains, based on the two of them, what we know of their general personality. Rabbi Shmuel was a Kohen. It might even be that this Rabbi Shmuel that was actually a Kohen Gadol. In other words, there was definitely a Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. The question is this one identical with that other Yishmael? At any rate, he was certainly a Kohen. A Kohen is the person who lives with hierarchies, with rules, with regulations. That is the very orderly way of bringing Hashem into our lives according to the regulations. He's an orderly person in his avodas Hashem. Rabbi Akiva was stormy. He was descended from Gerim, and he had to fight his way to Yiddishkeit. He lived with a constant desire to give up his life for the sake of Kiddush Hashem from martyrdom. So he's always living on the brink of martyrdom. The opportunity didn't arise until at the very end of his life, when the Romans caught him and tortured him. They tortured him to death, Nebuch, and then he said the Shema while they're torturing him, to the astonishment of his disciples, and he said to them, all my life I've been waiting for this opportunity to fulfill the Shema, where it said you shall love Hashem with all your life, meaning even as he takes your life. Finally, I got the opportunity. That's the way he lived his life. This is not a life of order. It's a life of reaching out, breaking out, to come closer to Hashem. It is like the avodah of a Baal Tshuva, like the service of Hashem of a Baal Tshuva, who doesn't go level by level, he jumps. Now, this will explain why Rabbi Shmuel holds that the mitzvahs were given in a general way at Sinai, and the details were spelled out later. Because the way the mitzvahs descend to us, it goes in an order. First, the general mitzvah, as it is in its source, which is a klal. Then the pratim, as the mitzvah descends closer to our world, the details are spelled out according to the conditions, the circumstances of our world. But Rabbi Akiva doesn't understand it that way because he doesn't live that way. Rabbi Akiva maintained that every detail is given in full right away. Every detail it matters, and every detail is equal to all other. It's not a matter of hierarchy and order. Now, furthermore, Mount Sinai was, the area around Mount Sinai was a desert. It's not a place of orderly living. And therefore, it also indicates a type of avodas Hashem, not orderly progression. And that's why at Mount Sinai, when the people heard the Aseret HaDibros, they expired with longing for Hashem after each and every one of the commandments. Why after each and every one? A commandment like thou shalt not steal. Is it such a lofty idea that it would prompt them to expire with longing for Hashem? So according to Rabbi Akiva, yes, because not only according to Rabbi Akiva, but following in line with that way of thinking, being that they're at Har Sinai, and Har Sinai is not a place of orderly progression. So just like Rabbi Akiva's avodah was generally a stormy one and waiting and hoping for Mesiras Nefesh, likewise all the Yidden at Mount Sinai, they too gave their life on Mesiras Nefesh with longing for Hashem. That's the argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel with regard to the details of mitzvahs. According to Rabbi Shmuel, which is the avodah of tzaddikim orderly, so it's only the klal of the mitzvah which is connected to Mount Sinai, beyond order. But the mitzvah in its details have to follow a certain order. But Rabbi Akiva, on his account of his avodas Hashem, in a way of tshuva, maintains that, first of all, because we're dealing with things which require conversion, remember, Rabbi Akiva descended from converts, so he's dealing with situations which need converting to Kedusha. And there, you must have, even in the details of the mitzvahs which you perform, you need Mesiras Nefesh there too. And also, you're able to have Mesiras Nefesh, even in the details, because on account of the avodah of tshuva, we're able to jump above the normal hierarchy, and even the details can be suffused with Mesiras Nefesh. So that's why Rashi learns the Pshuta Shel Mikra in a way which could agree with Rabbi Shmuel. But the accepted view is Rabbi Akiva, meaning the Pshuta Shel Mikra, which is the way the mitzvah was given from above, and that is an orderly way to the state there is that only the klal is given at Sinai. But in practice, when we have to encounter things of this world in our practice, we have to confront Gashmius, the physicality of the world, especially during the time of Golos. We need a strength in our working with the Gashmius, and that strength comes from the type of intense avodas Hashem characteristic of tshuva, which is the way, the pathway of Rabbi Akiva, that even the details are from Sinai in every detail, all my life. And the Rebbe adds that all my life, Rabbi Akiva says, I was waiting for the opportunity, means not only all the days of my life, but in every area of every day of my life, I lived in a tnuah, in a movement of Kiddush Hashem, Mesiras Nefesh.